My name is Neil Luehring, and I'm one of the guides here at Anglers Covey. I actually wear quite a few different hats for the Covey. I guide, I'm a tire, I am the safety director because I teach all the first aid classes because I was a firefighter paramedic in my previous life, I like to say. And I do all the rod repair at the shop. So I've been with the Covey since they pretty much opened the doors in 1982. Today we're going to tie a little pattern that I've been tying for my own fishing and started selling in the shop. Probably started around 20 years ago. And it's been a really successful pattern for me. We put them in the shop and I can't hardly keep them around here most of the time. So it's a little Baetis pattern, or a BWO. And Baetis and BWO are the same things. The Baetis are generally the first flies that hatch in the year, and they hatch pretty much throughout the year. There's about 150 different species of Baetis, but they all have kind of the same basic characteristics, which is a gray or a grayish olive body. Some of the bodies are very dark olive, and they have kind of a very large blue-gray wing on them. So those are kind of the main characteristics that we try to capture in this fly. As I tie the fly, I'll talk a little bit about the presentation and some of those things with it. So first of all, I thought I'd go through the tools that I'm going to use today. This is a Regal vise. It's a great vise. I love this vise. I've actually been using them for probably 30 plus years now. I own a few of them and they're really a good product. The thing I love about the Regal is there's no adjustment to it. You simply put the hook in and go. They make several different jaws. This one happens to be a stainless steel jaw, which is probably my favorite. But great product. I can't say enough good things about them. As for bobbins, today I'm just using an Umpqua ceramic bobbin. I'm going to use 8/0 Una thread. I probably use that for about 90% of my tying, not gray necessarily. This one is iron gray, and it's just kind of a carbon or a charcoal colored gray thread, fairly dark. And then I'm going to be using whisk nips. This is a tool that I use as scissors. I like them because when I pick them up, they're always open and they're very sharp. They have replaceable blades. A little trick that I picked up several years ago from some other commercial tires. I'm just using a simple whip finish, and then I'm using a teardrop type of plier. And this plier I like a lot because when you open it, the pivot point is here at the back. So when you open it, it opens like that. So it opens like this and closes on the hackle. A lot of hackle pliers tend to apply all the pressure at the tips. And I think those style pliers tend to break the hackle more. This is the best one that I have found for my purposes. So we'll use all these tools. Basically 4 tools here to make this fly work today. So let's tie Neil's blue-winged olive. We cleverly named it Neil's blue-winged olive. Yeah, not an ego thing, it's just evolved to that name. So first of all, I put a size 18 Timeco 100 hook in there, standard dry fly hook. I like the Timecos because they're very strong. They're a forged hook. If you look at them, they're flat on the sides, so they have a lot of strength to them. All right, so when we start the thread on the hook, simply come about halfway down the hook, 3 or 4 wraps up towards the eye, put a few wraps behind the eye to fill in that gap where the eye is bent around there and that blunt end comes back against the shank of the hook. Makes it much easier to tie that knot off when you get to the end if you have that gap filled up. All right, one of the things I like about the whisk snip is I can do a lot of the cutting by just simply doing pushes. I don't necessarily have to do snips, which sometimes if you're trying to cut something out of there, it's better to just do a little push than it is to do a snip. I like to rough out the entire hook with the thread, bring it back to where the bend is. All right, so we need to have blue dun hackle for the tail, and if you look at a neck, generally speaking, there's usually little spade feathers off to the side here that make really good hackle or a tail for hackles because they're shaped very wide like that. Those usually make the best tails. If you don't have those type of feathers, you can use some of this bigger stuff in here. Like this is a great feather for tails. Right here you can see the web line down the middle. What you want to do is make sure that you have enough of the hard stuff or the shiny stuff outside that web line to make your tail with. And that gives you the strength or the structural part of the tail that you need to have. So first thing I do is I'll take this and I'll strip off all this fuzz and just get it out of my way. All right, and I always pinch all this stuff to get my tails. So I'll pinch it together at the base like that, and I'll pull it up till the tips line up, and I'll pull it off there. And usually it takes us kind of a couple of small little clumps like that to make the tail. Pinch them together. The tail should be about the shank length of the hook. Tie that on. That one's probably a little long. You can always just slide them down like that. All right. All right, you want to come about 2/3 to 3/4 up the hook shank before you set the wing. So when I first started tying this pattern, I was using a white Antron product like this. This is Widow's Web that's made by Montana Fly Company. And I would tie it with a bright white. And then had some situations where I felt like the fish were refusing that fly, and I felt like it was because the wing was too bright on it. So I started using their silver color, same product, it's just a silver color. So you can see bright white as opposed to silver. Not a lot of difference there, but it tones it down just a little bit. Most of the flies that I tie for my personal use, I use this color. Recently, I've had times where the fish don't like that. They're like it's too bright of a wing. So when I'm fishing like that, I carry a few of them tied with, this is Widow's Web, it's called the smoke color. So this one gives you a little more of that authentic wing. The worst problem with it is that it's a little harder to see out there. If you're putting a size 22 out there at 30 feet, this is much easier to see than this is. So you have to decide how good your vision is and how much of a trade-off you want to have for the visibility. Sometimes it's better to have a fly that doesn't get as much action, but you can see it when they do eat it. If you have a fly you can't see, you could get strikes on it all day, and it's probably not going to do you a lot of good. So I'll take a clump of this stuff. You can see I just pulled off fibers about the size of a paper match would be a good maybe rule of thumb to go by. And I'll cut it off. I'm going to cut it down just a little bit here, just so it's a little easier to work with. And you can use both these pieces. So the Widow's Web, I tie in forward over the eye of the hook like this. I'm just going to use a soft loop to set that. Make sure I leave myself room at the eye of the fly. 2 or 3 wraps like that. Now this is one of the critical parts of tying this fly. If I come in here and I cut this at a 90-degree angle like that, when I wrap the thread over it, we're going to get a stair step there, if you will. But if I pull this up a little bit and I come in like this, I cut it like that, I get an angle so that when I wrap the thread back over that, I actually use that base of the wing to help me shape the body of the fly. So I have a nice taper here, and it means I don't have to put as much dubbing there, whatever, to get the thorax and the abdomen and all those things on this fly outline. So when I tie this fly, I use 2 colors of fly ride. I use their blue-winged olive color. This is a very dark olive. And I mix this, it's not fly ride, I'm sorry, it's Superfine dubbing. This is great, great stuff. It's a very small denier, which is a reference to the size of the fiber. And it's really great for tying these small dry flies because you can really shape the fly with it. So I'm using blue-winged olive, and I'm using caddis green. And what I'm going to do is take a little clump of each. I want to mix them about 50-50. And there's a lot of different shades of betas out there. If you're doing an olive color, kind of a medium olive color, I think it doesn't really matter which dubbing you use. I just happen to like the characteristics of this one. So you can see I have the blue-winged olive, the darker one, and I have the caddis green below. And I'm just going to take these and I'm going to start pulling them like this. I'm going to mix those colors. I do that because I want a little lighter color than their blue-winged olive, and I like to have a variegated color on the body. Sometimes you get a little clump of bright green or whatever, it really doesn't make a difference. But anyway, if you haven't tied with Superfine dubbing, this is the stuff particularly for these small dry flies. It's really, really good to work with. All right, so you can see now I've got a pretty even color in that just by pulling it like that. And that's the best way I've found to mix it. Unfortunately, if you put it in like a dubbing blender or something like that, it just clumps up on you. So just pull it like that a few times until you get those colors to even out. All right, so we're ready to dub the body. So the first thing I do is I'll take this stuff and I'll pull it like that and I'll fold it back over. And what that does, it gives me a really wispy little edge right there. So you can see this really fine little wispy edge right there. So that's where I take my fiber off of. So when I see people learning to dub flies, what I see is that they put way too much dubbing on. So you can see how little dubbing. I'm basically just covering the thread. I always like to pull mine up like this when I do it, just so I can see it better and access it better. All right, you can see I've kind of put a taper on there. Now when I wrap this, a lot of times you can slide it down a little bit if you want to. What's going to happen here is it'll form my body for me as I come forward. And I don't put a lot of dubbing on here. I dub it pretty tight, but it gives me a nice shape for the body like that. Then I pull this back. You can see I still have a little bit of dubbing. That's not an accident. I do that to help me stand that wing up. All right, so we pull the wing up like that. We want that wing to stand straight up. Now we want to post the wing like you do with a parachute pattern. So I'm going to bring the thread up. I'm going to bring it 90 degrees and I'm going to start coming around the wing. I'm going to do about 3 wraps right around the base of the wing like that. And that gives me that nice posted wing, kind of groups everything together and holds together. It's the same thing you would do if you were tying a parachute, basically. All right, for hackle on this, I like to use whiting saddles. These are sold, if you'll look at the packages like this. You want to find one that's got the little label on it that says midge sizes. So find one that has the midge size label on it. You still want to look at it and make sure that it'll tie the size that you want to tie. I have some that'll tie down to 24s and 26s. Some of the midge sizes are considered to be 18s or whatever. With a little luck and a little diligence, you can find one that'll let you do that. The other thing you can do if you don't want to spend that much money, because whitings are a little expensive, is you can buy these little 100 packs. And this thing right here, you can see this one's got a size, hook size on it, and they're rated for, you buy them and they're set up to tie a particular size of fly. So this is a good way to go. This is, per their packaging, it's enough flies to, or enough hackle to tie 100 flies. So that's a good way to go if you don't want to spend the money to buy the full saddle. So the beauty of the saddles is, look at the length of the feather that I have here. You can tie probably easily a half a dozen to 8 flies out of one of these feathers. And that's going to be in either the hackle pack or in the saddle itself. It doesn't really make any difference. They're both the same thing. One is just sorted, so it's packaged in smaller quantities and a little more expensive per feather. So what I've done here is I've kind of made sure that this is good for a size 18. All right, I'm going to break this off. I'm going to strip a little bit off the bottom of it like that. Now hackle has, I'm not sure if we can see this for sure or not, but has a shiny side and it has a dull side, right? So sometimes the easiest way to tell is it has a little bit of curve. The shiny side will have a little bit of a curve down on it. It's important that we distinguish that because we want to wrap it with that shiny side going towards the back of the fly because it curves the hackle fibers the correct way. So I'm going to shorten this up just a little bit so it's a little easier to work with. Sometimes they're too long. And when I set my hackles, I do it kind of backwards compared to what most people do. I was actually taught to tie by an old English tyer, and this is a old European technique for setting the hackles. So I'm going to set the hackle out the front of the fly like this. I just put the stem along the hook and I tie it in. Shiny side of the feather is up, okay? So I'm going to put 2 or 3 wraps there, and then I'm going to come behind the wing with the thread like that. I'll take my hackle plier. I'm going to pull that wing back. I'm going to put about 3 or 4 wraps here in front of the wing. I'm going to put a couple behind the wing like that. Now, switch hands. I take the hackle plier in my left hand, I take the thread in my right hand, and I simply bring it over, and that ties the hackle off like that. Pretty simple. So the question is why would I go to all that trouble to set the hackle? Well, notice what I'm doing here, how I'm winding out through the hackle to get to the eye of the fly. So this technique, I think, does 2 or 3 things. First of all, most dry flies that you buy, the hackle is the weak point. Think about it. What normally breaks or goes bad on the fly first, it's the hackle that breaks, right? So I have not only tied in my hackle here and here like we do with when we tie the hackle at the back and wrap it forward, but I've tied it in throughout the body of the hackle, so it makes it much more durable. The second thing I like about this technique is that the taper of the hackle, particularly when you're using neck hackles, goes with the fly. So usually they're wider at the base and narrow at the tips. Not necessarily true with these saddles, but when you wrap it, it gives you more of a taper to the hackle so that the fly sits better on the water. The last part of it that I really like is the fact that I'm not out here trying to clip that hackle off around the eye of the fly and clogging up or covering up that thing, that eye. So I'm ready to tie my whip finish here, and I kind of sweep it back a little bit, and I'll usually throw a wrap or so on there. I don't get too worried about it if I get a couple of hackle fibers tied up in the whip finish. I just clip them out of there and I don't worry about it. So I'm going to put about 4 wraps here with the whip finisher on here. Push, pull. All right, I'm going to come back. I'm going to do one of my little push cuts right there. I'm going to snip this little bit of hackle out of there. All right, so to finish the fly, first of all, we got to cut this wing. So when I cut the wing, I come at a pretty steep angle. I used to think of it as being a 45-degree angle, but I think it's more, it's a steeper angle than that even, probably more like, a 25-degree or something like that. All right, BWOs have a fairly long wing. All right, so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm shaping that wing to be more like a natural wing, and you can give them a little haircut, and I'll usually come back and hit the top of that at just a little bit of an angle like that. And I'll leave them a little long. If you look at the naturals on the water, they have a fairly tall wing. All right, we can clip this out here. What I generally like to do is take it out of there, come in and to cut it. Now, whenever you're cutting anything out of a fly like this, you always want to brace one hand against the other, so that when you're cutting, you're not like this, and you're not cutting something that you don't want to cut. So I can come in here, I could do a little push cut with my scissors as well. I'm going to cut that hackle out. I'm going to turn the fly sideways, and I'm going to cut the hackle. I'm going to trim it equal to the barb of the fly, or the bottom of the bend. And that gives us a fly that sets very nicely. The characteristics I was trying to get in this fly when I designed it, and it was really not just a design but an evolution of the fly over fishing it for a long time. One was a good representation of the wing, and unlike a lot of the posted wings like this, you can see where this one's tapered. Could even get just a touch more of a haircut there to capture that. So it gives it the appearance of that natural wing. Rather than have a parachute to get the fly to ride low, I simply clip that hackle off to get it down, and it rides really nice in the water. And one of the things I really like about that flat hackle on the bottom is it makes that fly pop up to where it rides in the right position. And if you ever fish with it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So, and then the third thing I was really trying to get was visibility. I wanted that fly to be able to be seen at 30 feet. I fish them down into 26s, so if you're fishing at 26 at 30 feet, tough to do if you don't have something to give you a sight reference on it. Usually the wing is, this medium colored wing is the one that works the best. You can see here, I tied one with the darker wing, the smoke colored wing. That one's darker, and sometimes that's what it takes to catch the fish, but much harder to see on the water than the lighter wing is, so that's the trade-off. Anyway, I hope you get a chance to tie a few of them. I hope you get a chance to fish a few of them, and I hope they work well for you. Good fishing.